I've had a lot of people ask me where they should start when it comes to playing Metroidvania games on Steam. So I'm putting together a list, my top 10 Metroidvania games/series that you should play on PC. Little disclaimer here, I know that this one's going to have a lot of different opinions, and perhaps there's a little bit of mainstream recency bias with my list, but it's a good place to start. Let me know what you think.
Honorable beings were conceived.
At number 10, I'm going with perhaps my most controversial pick, Aeterna Noctis. This game has received a lot of mixed opinions, but I absolutely loved it. Highlights to expect from Aeterna Noctis is some of the better platforming sequences that I have experienced in any game that I've ever played. It definitely looks fantastic, and the storyline is really interesting, and it is one of the few Metroidvania games where the storyline kept me playing, wanting to know what was happening next. Now, there are some criticisms around difficulty level and also the fighting mechanics in the game, but I think it looks stunning, has great exploration, fantastic control and platforming, definitely on my must-play list. At number 9, I had to include Guacamelee in here, and you can pretty much pick up any of the titles and you're going to get a really fun beat-em-up Metroidvania game with some slapstick humor based in the Mexiverse, which is colorful, which is fun, and actually looks quite impressive. Guacamelee is a really robust, heavy crash and bash Metroidvania game, but there's some really cool boss fights to experience, and there's definitely reasons why people often talk about this with a whole level of nostalgia and some pretty happy memories. Let's move on to a pretty hardcore gritty Metroidvania game in Axiom Verge. And whilst it might not seem at first to be the most impressive looking game, the pixel art graphics definitely grow on you, and the diversity in terms of gameplay mechanics, the ability to utilize your glitches to get through walls, and a really interesting sci-fi based storyline make this one of the must-play games. There's some really fun progression and problem solving that will help you get further into the game, and collecting a bunch of power-ups and different weapons are going to be a whole lot of fun. Can be on the harder side, but Axiom Verge is definitely one to look into. If you want to experience a Metroidvania game that definitely sits on the harder side, then Blasphemous is the game for you. When it comes to pixel art design and story and setting and those visual elements, I think Blasphemous could possibly be the best Metroidvania game that's ever been released. And whilst the controls are definitely not my favorite from this list, the boss fights stand out, and the storyline is one that's definitely memorable. I've got Grime at number 6, and I've put it in here because it is just so fun and it is so cool to play. There's also a sequel coming this year, so keep an eye out for that. I absolutely love the fighting mechanics in Grime. It feels so fun to battle your way through, and being able to absorb and consume your enemies to get your upgrades is a really cool add-on. Once again, we have a pretty disturbing and dark environment to play through. The boss fights are fantastic, the background art is fantastic. Grime sits comfortably on this list. At number 5, I have 9 Souls, and our first recent-ish Metroidvania game here, and possibly one of the better looking games that's been released. I think it might be up there in the top 3 Metroidvania games in terms of visual design. 9 Souls is this parry-heavy, action-packed Metroidvania game that rarely gets talked about without Sekiro being mentioned as well. So once again, we've got another pretty difficult fighting mechanic style game to play that some people will rage a little bit at, and a bunch of fantastic looking bosses that are really fun to play against. I have seen 9 Souls listed as many people's favorite Metroidvania game ever, and I think it'd be well worth checking it out, especially if you want something that looks quite impressive with a bit of difficulty. Sultan Sanctuary plays like a 2D inspired Dark Souls. I feel like I've said this a few times, so be expecting that difficulty to be ramped up pretty high. You'll be playing through a very cursed and dark and twisted realm, collecting salt and hoping to find sanctuary so that you have some kind of save point to rely upon when you inevitably die. Whilst I have Sultan Sanctuary quite high on this list because I think it's really unique and definitely a classic in the Metroidvania genre, as one that I'd recommend maybe not jumping into straight away because it might put you off a little bit, and there's a few others that are a little bit more accessible and friendly. At number 3 on my list, I have a game that was released last year and was so well received that many people said it tackled the Metroidvania genre in ways that they had never expected. It's Animal Well, the very atmospheric and friendly looking game that encourages you to think outside the box if you want to solve some pretty interesting puzzles. It looks great, it sounds great, and it kind of throws you into this game and lets you learn what you need to do through different clues that you'll find without interrupting too much. There are some enemies that you'll need to escape, but this is really an exploration, puzzle-based Metroidvania game, and one that is just so well loved at the moment. At number 2 on the list, we've got the Ori series, and I'm always surprised when people talk negatively about the 2 games released here, because in my opinion, if I was going to play any game for the first time, this is the one that I'd recommend. Such a fun and playful game with some of the best control mechanics in any genre that I have ever experienced. Now, you can argue that it doesn't have the same depth or edge that some of the other games on this list has, and you've also got the fact that it's published by Xbox Game Studio, so some people might not like that, but Ori definitely has an engaging storyline, a fun world to explore, and to be honest, I think the sequel is probably even better than the original, with some chase sequences that I just loved. If you're starting out, you can do a lot worse than starting with Ori and the Blind Forest. Finish that and move on to the second one. I feel like I'm at a rock festival and I'm going to say that Metallica is my favorite band because it's pretty clear to me that Hollow Knight is the number one Metroidvania game that you must play on Steam. And I really can't think of another game that is as well loved, that has as much of the internet in a frenzy looking out for Silksong coming, I don't think this year, but fingers crossed. And it comes down to the fact that it is just such a fun game to play. And it's developed in Australia, so brownie points for that. Hollow Knight looks so good and controls so well that it essentially led to years and years of other games trying to copy the style and the feel of it in a game that just creates areas and atmosphere that make it so fun to explore. The fighting mechanics are crisp. There's definitely games that have better out there, but it's easy to play through. And the animation is absolutely stunning. I have Hollow Knight out there as one of the most genre-defining games of any genre and possibly one of the greatest indie games that's ever been released. So it's pretty easy for me to say that the number one game, Metroidvania, on Steam is Hollow Knight. And of course, there's going to be people that disagree with every single thing I'll put here, so the best way for you to disagree with me is to leave a comment. If you watch this far through, subscribing lets YouTube know that this isn't a terrible channel, and I sure would appreciate it. Thanks for watching.